Hey YouTube folks, welcome to another video on this channel, Esko M. Zadrisko. And in today's video, a historic, sensational match where two of the greatest chess players in history faced off, Magnus Carlsen and Garry Kasparov. This match took place in 2004 when Magnus Carlsen was only 13 years old. It's an official game from a rapid tournament, okay? So each player had around 25 minutes on the clock with increment. And at that time, Magnus Carlsen had a Fédération Internationale des Échecs rating of 2,484 and was an international master. But he was a prodigy, already with a lot of attention on him, right? Because he was on a phenomenal rise in chess, attracting everyone's attention, right? And playing black here was Garry Kasparov, who at the time was the current world chess champion with one of the highest ratings in chess history up to that point, okay? 2-8-3-1. And another very interesting fact about this game is that the day before, Magnus Carlsen had played against the former world champion Anatoly Karpov in the same tournament, okay? Magnus defeated Karpov, so there was this whole feeling. The chess prodigy beating former world champions, right? In this case, Karpov. So Kasparov here played black in this game, and he must have been a bit wary. And another important fact about this game is that this was the first time Kasparov faced such a young player, a chess prodigy, in an official match. So there was this whole feeling surrounding all of this. During this analysis of this game, I'll play some video clips from the matchup here so you can see what the atmosphere and the environment of the game were like. And an interesting thing is that before the match started, Magnus was there waiting for Kasparov to arrive. Kasparov was late for this match, so for a moment people were already wondering, is Kasparov not going to come play? Then Magnus will win by default, right? Because Kasparov didn't show up? Is that what's going to happen? In fact, after the match, in the conversation, in the mini interview with Magnus Carlsen, he mentioned that he was very anxious about it because he didn't want to win by default. He wanted to play the match against Kasparov, right? He was really looking forward to it. And this match, yes, it did happen, and it was a match. Sensational. Hold on to your chair so you don't fall, because this match here is the immortal one between Magnus Carlsen and Garry Kasparov. So, without further ado, let's get straight to this amazing chess game now. So guys, here we are, and playing with the white pieces was Magnus Carlsen against none other than Garry Kasparov, guiding the black pieces. And Magnus starts the game here with d4 the queen's pawn, solid, and Kasparov then plays d5. The game continues with c4, c6, and after the sequence knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, and e6 Kasparov here chooses to play the Semi-Slav defense, which is a super solid defense, right? Magnus played the variation with bishop g5, pinning the knight on f6 bishop to d7. And at this moment, this move is an important one, okay? As you can see up here, Kasparov took some time to make this move. Magnus was walking around, looking at the playing hall, checking out the other boards, and the moment Kasparov played knight from b to d7, Magnus Carlsen immediately sat down and played e3, which is a theoretical move in this position. But anyway, people are always a bit surprised because he came and played super fast. He was already expecting Kasparov's knight from b to d7. The game continued here with the move queen to a5, and this is certainly a bit of a sneaky move, let's say. Right, because he's keeping an eye over there on the bishop on g4. Okay, so if white plays here in a certain way, carelessly, you can fall for some tactical shots here, especially when playing against Kasparov, right? Magnus played the move knight to d2 here, which is a very theoretical move in this position. But what I wanted to show you is that if you play a move like bishop to d3, for example, which seems like a totally fine move, right? Then you allow the capture on c4 bishop, takes c4 and knight to e4. And now there are problems here with the knight on c3 and also the bishop on e4, which is attacked twice. There are some tricks here, so you need to be careful. Magnus played knight to d2, a familiar move in this position. The game continued with bishop to b4, pressuring c3, followed by queen to c2, defending and eyeing e4. After castling and bishop to e2, Kasparov played e5, seeking the initiative early on, a characteristic of his playstyle. He always tried to play as actively as possible. He's pressuring the center and proposing breakthroughs. Magnus takes this moment to castle. The pawn on d4 is captured, and Magnus didn't recapture this pawn directly, okay? He played an intermediate move, knight to b3 attacking the valuable queen piece. Kasparov played queen to b6, threatening the queen. The central and c4 pawns were then captured. Bishop takes on c4, and in this position, notice that Magnus Carlsen now has an isolated pawn, which was possibly one of Kasparov's ideas, to play against the isolated pawn. But on the other hand, Kasparov's position also has some problems here, because notice that the bishop on c8 can't get out easily. The knight on d7 really hinders the development of the light-squared bishop because the knight doesn't have squares it can jump to in order to free the bishop. Kasparov will soon try to solve this problem. He played a 5, threatening to play a 4 and harass the knight on b3. Magnus restricted this by playing a 4 himself. Kasparov played queen to c7, freeing up the d6 square for the knight, to free the light-squared bishop. But on the other hand, Kasparov also can't make this move so easily, because there's a bishop takes f6 here that would completely open up the black king's side, so the position isn't that simple. There are some problems happening. Magnus plays rook from a1, bringing the rook to the file. h6 Kasparov now wants to get rid of this bishop, right? So he can play knight to b6 without any issues of opening up the castling. Magnus doesn't allow it. He keeps an eye on the knight on f6, and in this position, Kasparov plays another sneaky move, which is bishop to d6, now eyeing the pawn on h2, waiting to see if maybe Magnus would play bishop to g3, which would open up the option to exchange bishops, and there wouldn't be this pressure on the f6 square anymore. It would make the move knight to b6 easier for black. But Magnus, in this position, didn't play bishop to g3 here. He played the move h3, which is a very interesting move. At first, it seems like black can play g5 here. It wasn't a move played in the game, but the idea is that it looks like the bishop will have to go back, and I'm taking and winning a pawn here, apparently, in this position. But that's not actually true, okay? Because if black plays the move g5, they're going to lose this game, because it allows a continuation here that's queen to g6 super strong. And you can't take the queen because the bishop on c4 is pinning the f7 pawn. You'd have to play king to h8 here, and now queen takes h6, knight to h7, and bishop takes g5, and all the pawns protecting the black king have collapsed. So this position would be winning for Magnus, okay? Kasparov saw this, so h3 works here and still keeps the pressure on the f6 square, but Kasparov, being a warrior who always fights for dynamism and initiative, played anyway with the move knight to b6, which leads to a mess you won't believe. There are tactics everywhere here. Well, Magnus now has his bishop under threat on c4, but he also has the option to capture the knight on f6, which brings up these themes of opening up black's king side, right? So Magnus played bishop takes f6 here and got into a total mess against Kasparov. Of course, Kasparov can't take that bishop, okay? Because here he would end up losing the game. Because again, there would be the move queen to g6, and the pawn remains pinned here by the bishop, and all the pawns are going to collapse. If he moves the king to e8, I can take on f6 with my queen. Black has two options in this position. The king can move to e7 or g8. If the king moves to e7, then I defend my bishop with bishop to d3, and I'm going to exploit the open rook theme here. So black would have to play a move like king to e8, and now f4 would be a winning move here for white, which brings a very direct idea: to bring the rook to the g3 square and checkmate. So in this position, Kasparov would be lost if he went into this variation, of course. So after the move queen to f6, if he played the move here, king g8 will also lose because there are many continuations. I can capture the pawn on h6 here by playing queen to g6, the same idea. The pawn remains pinned. If king to h8, I have queen takes h6, taking another pawn. And after the move king to g8, I could play rook to e4 with the idea of rook to h4 and mate in several ways. So this position is also winning for white. So because of that, after the move bishop takes f6 played by Magnus, Kasparov can't capture no matter what. This bishop, he has to take the bishop on c4 here. That was the move he played. And in this position, Magnus now makes a move that certainly surprised Kasparov a lot here, which was the move knight to e4, because this move is really annoying. It opens a discovered attack on the knight on c4, and black can't capture the bishop on f6 here. Another line that also can't happen is simply retreating the knight, because if the knight goes back, then white would have knight takes d6, queen takes, and bishop e7. And look here, a fork winning the exchange, and white would be better in this position. So after the move knight to e4, black has problems here because, as I said, he can't take the bishop here. Otherwise, he'll fall into a mating line, which would be knight takes f6 check, After forced king g7, queen h7 king, takes f6, queen takes d6, and after king f5, there are mates with g4 the Grob move. The king is absolutely trapped. So, knight to e4 created a lot of problems for black's position. And in this position, hold on, we're playing here against Kasparov, and he thinks the strongest move, the only move that keeps the balance in the game, is a difficult move. It was bishop to h2, and now a sequence of moves begins here, which is not so common, a very refined tactic for both sides. Magnus played king to h1 here, and now Kasparov has his knight under attack. Still can't take the bishop here. He can't capture the bishop. Otherwise, he falls into the same mating line, which would be knight takes f6 king to g7 queen to h7. And after king to f5, he'll get checkmated with the same g4 Grob move. So he still can't capture, never, the bishop on f6. So after the move king to h1, Kasparov now has his knight under threat. And he plays a very interesting move here, which is knight to a6. But Raphael, he's giving up the whole bishop. Yes, he's giving up the bishop. But at the same time, when you take the bishop, you get into several discovered attack themes here with knight takes e4. And the game went on like this, okay? It continued here with king takes h2, knight takes e4 with the discovered check. And now it looks like the one who's losing here is Magnus. Why? Because if the king moves to g1, which wasn't the move played in the game, Kasparov now takes the bishop on f6, winning a piece in this position. But Magnus didn't make that move. After the move knight takes e4 played here by Kasparov with the discovered check, Magnus defends his bishop by moving it back to e5, now attacking Kasparov's queen. It seems Kasparov is losing now. This position is insane as Kasparov's queen is threatened. If the queen moves the wrong way, the knight on e4 will be lost. So Kasparov also had an antidote for this. He played knight to d6 here, which defends the queen, defends the knight, but at the same time, Kasparov puts himself in this pin from the bishop on e5. And Magnus then takes advantage of this initiative and plays queen to c5 here, threatening to win the whole night. There's only one way for black to defend this knight, which is the move Kasparov played. Rook to e8, and now Magnus starts to put pressure on black's position with the move d5, which is a really annoying move because you can't capture it. Otherwise, the whole queen falls, the queen is loose. Kasparov has some problems to solve here, so he gets the queen out of the pin by playing queen to d7, and now Magnus plays a very strong move, which is knight to d4, bringing the threat of winning a pawn, and Kasparov can't capture the pawn on d5. That wasn't the move played, but if he had captured on d5, then Magnus would win the game here with a forced sequence of moves, okay? Which would be queen takes d6, bishop takes, rook takes. After rook e8, king e7s, and rook c1, the bishop on c8 is completely pinned. If the bishop moves, the rook falls. In this line, Magnus would win the game. So after the move knight d4, you can't take on d5 Kasparov played in this position here. The move knight f5, trying to simplify a bit of this madness he's facing here from the prodigy Magnus Carlsen at the time. So after knight f5, Magnus now wins a pawn in this variation by taking here on c6. Notice that you can't capture the knight, not even with an intermediate move. The queen is threatened by the pawn, so b takes c6. And now knight takes c6. Magnus Carlsen won the pawn here against the reigning world champion at the time, Garry Kasparov. The audience was enthralled by this sensational game. The prodigy is defeating Kasparov. Well, the rook is under threat. Kasparov played the move rook to rook here. The game continues with rook d1 attacking the queen. Kasparov plays queen e6, and white responds with a natural move, rook e1, putting the rook right in front of the queen. But you always have to be careful because Kasparov is playing as black. And he's going to find a very interesting line here with bishop to b7, now threatening to take the knight. From c6, so Magnus now has to defend. This piece, Magnus Carlsen played the move knight to d4 here, attacking the queen, and also offering a knight exchange. And in this position, Kasparov simplifies a bit by playing knight takes d4. After queen takes d4, a threat appears on g7. Kasparov defends against this threat, creating a new threat to white's position with queen to g6. He defended here and threatened mate on g1 with queen takes g2, so it must be defended. Magnus Carlsen played queen to g4, offering a queen trade, After the queens were exchanged, the resulting endgame has cooled down the position, because it's an opposite-colored bishop endgame. But hold on, there are still rooks on the board. The game continues here with the move bishop to c6, attacking the pawn. Magnus defended with bishop to e3 f6, attacking the bishop on e5, and then the move bishop to c3 rook takes e1 Kasparov starts to simplify the position a bit, right? Rook takes e1, then bishop to d5, attacking the pawn. Magnus played rook to b1. The game continues with king to fa7, king to g3, improving the king's positions. Rook to b8 pressures the pawn, and Magnus plays bishop to e4, offering a pawn exchange. A takes b4, bishop takes b4, then bishop to c4 was played, with the idea of holding the a pawn, which is soon going to start advancing, right? Magnus played a5, bf3, consolidating. Kasparov responded kaz6, k4, and played h5, proposing a pawn exchange. The exchange occurred gx h5, kx h5, rh1 plus k6, and the game continued with bc5. Magnus places the bishop on b6 to limit Kasparov's rook, but Kasparov had calculated this and takes advantage by putting the rook on the 7th rank, threatening the pawn on g2. Magnus defends with king to g3. Kasparov plays rook to a2, threatening the pawn on a5. Magnus tries to create pressure with rook, bishop to b6, king to f7, and rook to c1 Kasparov. Defends interestingly with g5. After rook to c7, king to g6, and rook to c6. Magnus sets a trap, eyeing the pawn on f6, threatening the bishop on d4, and potentially opening a discovered attack on the bishop on a6. But Kasparov had all of this prepared already. He played a very interesting move here, which is bishop to f1, which now opens up a double attack here on the pawn on g6 and doesn't allow Magnus to have time to play bishop to d4 to put pressure on the pawn on f6, right? Actually, it's quite interesting that playing bishop to d4 loses the game. Okay, because here Kasparov would have rook takes on g2, and after the only possible move, which would be king to h3, there's rook to c2 with a discovered check, and Magnus is going to lose the entire rook, right? It would be a sad ending for Magnus Carlsen. But of course, Magnus saw this sequence, so after the move bishop f1, Magnus defended here with bishop f2, blocking the rook's attack on the g2 square. But on the other hand, the pawn on a5 is also falling. And Kasparov didn't even capture that pawn, okay? Because in this position, they drew the game. But Raphael, why did they draw? Isn't there a game? The position is already very limited here, isn't it? If Kasparov played rook to a5, now it's 2 pawns for each side, opposite-colored bishop endgame, right? If you play bishop d4 to take the pawn on f6, Kasparov would respond with rook a6, leading to a queen trade in a drawn position. But anyway, it's amazing. A 13-year-old player, right? Magnus Carlsen at the time. Little did they know, right? He would become the future world chess champion, one of the greatest players in history. But it was a big deal, Magnus drawing this game at such a young age against Kasparov. So there you have it, folks, a sensational game. An immortal game between these two super geniuses in the history of chess. I hope you enjoyed this game. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button down below and see you in the next videos. Subtitles by Adriana Zanato.